My parents insisted I cancel my wedding to prioritize my sister's engagement, but everything changed when her secret about cheating came to light. Engaged to my fiance Jake for the past 8 months, everything about our October wedding seemed to be falling perfectly into place until last week when my parents threw us an unexpected curveball. To give you some context, my younger sister Mia, 25, has always been the golden child in our family. She's been dating her boyfriend Tom for about 2 years. Growing up, it felt like my parents showered Mia with all their attention and admiration, leaving little for me. While I excelled academically and played volleyball in high school, Mia's role as a cheerleader always seemed to grab the spotlight. I don't mean to sound bitter. Cheerleading is absolutely worthy of recognition, but it stung to see my efforts so easily overshadowed. Over time, I learned to cope with their indifference. I distanced myself from my family emotionally and even grew resentful of Mia, despite knowing it wasn't really her fault. The turning point came in college when I met Jake. He helped me realize my worth and encouraged me to see my accomplishments as valid, regardless of who acknowledged them. With his support, I began to understand that holding Mia accountable for our parents' favoritism wasn't fair. Determined to rebuild my relationship with Mia, I started reaching out to her. At first, it was awkward, but over time, she opened up. We talked about everything, silly things, serious things, and while our lives were very different, I appreciated the progress we were making. Slowly but surely, our bond began to heal. Mia and I had finally reached a point where we felt like the sisters we were always meant to be. She was the first person I called when Jake proposed, and her excitement mirrored my own. Mia couldn't wait to help plan the wedding, eagerly offering ideas and suggestions. For a while, everything felt perfect, until last Wednesday, when I received an unexpected phone call from my mother. At first, the conversation seemed ordinary. Mom asked about the wedding plans, which was unusual given her usual lack of interest. I should have sensed something was off, but I brushed it aside and shared a few updates. After a few minutes of small talk, she finally got to the real reason for her call. Mia and Tom were getting engaged. I was genuinely happy for Mia when I heard the news. What could be more exciting than both of us celebrating major milestones in our lives? But something about the way Mom phrased it, planning to get engaged, made me pause. When I asked for clarification, Mom explained that I couldn't understand what had gotten into my parents. They had generously offered to cover the venue costs for my wedding when we were struggling to make ends meet. At the time, I thought they were finally taking an interest in my life, something I had yearned for my whole life. In hindsight, it seemed less about supporting me and more about keeping up appearances, perhaps even competing with Jake's parents. But I was too excited then to question their motives. Unfortunately, their sudden support came with strings attached. Mom's reasoning for wanting me to postpone my wedding was nothing short of absurd. She explained that Mia wanted to bask in the spotlight of her engagement for an entire year, complete with social media announcements, glamorous photo shoots, and all the attention she could garner. I was dumbfounded. Why should my plans, carefully crafted over months, be derailed for something as trivial as Instagram likes? I tried to reason with Mom, suggesting compromises like keeping my wedding low profile online or allowing Mia to share the spotlight, but none of it mattered. Mom insisted that if I didn't delay the wedding, they would withdraw their financial support entirely. It felt like emotional blackmail. They were using their promise of money as leverage to prioritize Mia's whims over my happiness. I couldn't believe the lengths they were willing to go. I voiced my frustration, calling their request unfair and selfish. Mom countered by accusing me of being insensitive to Mia's feelings. She claimed I was the one being selfish. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my entire life stepping aside for Mia's happiness, yet here I was, being asked to sacrifice one of the most significant moments of my life for her yet again. When I asked what about my feelings, Mom had no real response. Instead, she reiterated her ultimatum: postpone the wedding or they'd pull their funding. I was livid. For years, I had endured being overlooked, yet I never imagined they'd stoop this low. The day I had dreamed of, meticulously planned, and saved for was now hanging by a thread thanks to their favoritism. Fueled by anger and a sense of betrayal, I did something impulsive, something I never thought I would do. I reached out to Mia's boyfriend, Tom. If my parents wanted to pit us against each other, then I wasn't going to hold back anymore. I felt cornered, and this was my way of fighting back. Tom and I had met on a few occasions over the years. Once, Jake and I even went on a double date with Mia and Tom. I remembered that evening vividly. It was one of those rare, perfect nights when everyone got along, and for a moment, it felt like we were just two happy couples enjoying each other's company. But those days felt so distant now, replaced by this brewing storm of favoritism and resentment. I debated whether I was doing the right thing, but the more I thought about my parents' blatant disregard for my happiness, the more justified I felt. This wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for myself for the first time in my life. If my parents couldn't treat me fairly, I would find my own way to ensure my voice was heard. During one of those rare moments when everything seemed perfect on our double date, Mia and I excused ourselves to the restroom to freshen up. While we were fixing our makeup, she handed me her phone to hold as she washed her hands. That's when a text notification popped up on her screen. It was from someone named Mike asking if they could get back together. My heart skipped a beat. I knew Mia had dated someone named Mike years ago, but I had assumed he was ancient history. I tried to resist, but curiosity got the better of me. "Who's Mike, and why is he asking to meet again?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Mia's reaction was immediate. She brushed it off, claiming Mike was just an old acquaintance reaching out, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her words. Not convinced, I pressed her further. Was something going on between her and Mike? She reluctantly admitted they'd exchanged a few texts recently, but insisted it was harmless. "It's nothing," she said lightly, avoiding my gaze. When I asked if Tom knew about this, her response made my stomach turn. "Tom doesn't need to know," she said with a shrug, as though it were no big deal. Tom was a kind man who seemed completely devoted to Mia. The idea of her hiding something like this from him didn't sit well with me. Still, Mia assured me that she had stopped talking to Mike, and I chose to believe her. I let the matter go, thinking it wasn't my place to interfere. Consumed by frustration and a desire to defend my happiness, I made a rash decision. I called Tom and told him what I had seen that day, about the text from Mike and Mia's casual dismissal of it. I even suggested he keep an eye on her if he wanted to know the truth. As soon as the words left my mouth, I felt a pang of regret. It wasn't my place to meddle in their relationship, and the way I delivered the information wasn't fair. But my anger at Mia and my parents blinded me to the consequences of my actions. 2 days later, the fallout began. My mother called me, her voice trembling with rage. She was yelling so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She accused me of causing chaos in Mia's relationship, treating my actions as if I had committed an unforgivable betrayal. Her words hit hard, and for a moment I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. As it turned out, Tom had confronted Mia after my call, telling her they needed to talk. Mia, unaware of what was coming, had gotten dressed up, thinking it was a special moment, perhaps even the proposal she had been anticipating. Instead, she arrived to find Tom visibly upset. What should have been a celebration of their love quickly turned into a heated confrontation, all because of the truths I had let slip in a moment of anger. Looking back, I realized that while my intentions may have been rooted in frustration, my approach was flawed. My actions, though justified in my mind at the time, had caused ripples that disrupted not just Mia's world, but mine as well. Now I was left to face the fallout of a family dynamic that seemed more fractured than ever. Tom, visibly upset, confronted Mia about what I had told him. He asked her directly if it was true, repeating the details I had shared. At first, Mia denied everything, but when Tom insisted on seeing her phone, she became defensive and angry. She accused him of not trusting her, which only escalated the argument. Eventually, Tom ended their relationship, leaving Mia heartbroken and furious. The aftermath was swift and brutal. My mother called me again, her voice filled with rage. She accused me of ruining Mia's relationship and destroying the family dynamic. In the background, I could hear Mia shouting, her words laced with bitterness and betrayal. I kept apologizing, trying to explain that my actions stemmed from their insistence that I postpone my wedding. I told them how much effort Jake and I had put into our plans and how deeply it hurt to be asked to sacrifice it all. But my apologies fell on deaf ears. My father delivered the final blow, announcing that they were rescinding their financial support for the venue. At that moment, it felt like I had lost everything. My parents. Jake was away on a business trip during all of this. and I dreaded telling him about the mess I had created. I tried reaching out to Mia, hoping to talk things through and make amends, but she ignored my calls and texts. The silence was deafening and the stress was unbearable. I knew I had made mistakes, but I also knew the situation wasn't entirely my fault. Still, the guilt consumed me. When Jake returned, I decided it was time to come clean. I told him everything about my parents' ultimatum, my call to Tom, and the fallout that followed. To my relief, Jake was incredibly understanding. He assured me that we would work through this together, which was exactly what I needed to hear. He also pointed out that being honest with him earlier would have been the right thing to do, and I agreed. Despite the setback, Jake and I resolved to move forward with our wedding, even if it meant cutting costs. We brainstormed ways to save money and reached out to friends and family for help. To our surprise, one of Jake's friends came through in a big way. He connected us with a stunning but affordable venue that fit our new budget perfectly. While we had to delay the wedding slightly to make everything work, I didn't mind. It felt like a fresh start amidst the chaos. Throughout this, I tried to maintain some form of communication with my parents. Looking back, I'm not entirely sure why I kept trying. Perhaps it was fear of losing them entirely or guilt for how things had unfolded. But they remained resolute in their anger, declaring they wouldn't attend the wedding if we went ahead as planned. It hurt deeply, but I focused on what I could control. Slowly but surely, Jake and I began piecing everything together, determined to celebrate our love despite the challenges. The RSVPs began rolling in, and sadly, many of my family members either declined to attend or didn't bother responding at all. I didn't need to be a detective to figure out why. Word had spread, and not in my favor. One of my aunts confided in me that Mom and Mia were portraying me as the villain in a dramatic soap opera, painting me as someone who lied to sabotage Mia's happiness. They even twisted the story to claim that Mia had been engaged first and that I had rushed to get engaged simply to steal the spotlight. It was one thing for them to ignore me, but to fabricate lies about my character felt like a deliberate attack. It took energy to twist the truth this way, and frankly, I was exhausted. All my life, I had fought to rise above the way my parents minimized me, yet here I was again, battling their narrative. According to them, I was jealous, vindictive, and solely responsible for ruin. Amidst the chaos, an old friend Meg reached out. We hadn't spoken in years, but she had caught wind of the family drama and decided to check in. Her call was an unexpected comfort. She reminded me of the person I used to be before my family's negativity took its toll. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt seen and supported by someone outside of my immediate circle. It gave me the strength to keep moving forward, even as the storm raged on around me. After leaving for college, I had gradually lost touch with Meg, and our connection dwindled to the occasional interaction on social media. However, Mia had maintained her friendship with Meg for a few more years, their bond lasting well into their early 20s. When Meg reached out to me amid the family drama, she shared a shocking revelation about Mia's infidelity, an incident that had occurred roughly a year ago. Meg recounted the events of her 25th birthday party, which Mia had attended without Tom, who was supposedly away on a trip. As the evening unfolded and the guests grew increasingly intoxicated, Mia's behavior became noticeably flirtatious with several male attendees, including Meg's own boyfriend. At first, Meg brushed it off, attributing it to Mia's naturally outgoing personality. But as the night wore on and the party began winding down, Meg realized that Mia and her boyfriend had been missing for some time. To Meg's disbelief, she found them together in a compromising position in another room. Mia's actions that night shocked everyone present, especially given that she and Tom had been dating for nearly 3 years by that point. The incident not only humiliated Meg, but also caused a rift that ended their friendship. It was a turning point that made Meg reevaluate her perception of Mia. When Meg learned about the current situation with Mia and Tom, she felt compelled to share this story with me. She believed I needed to know that Mia's infidelity wasn't a one-time mistake, it was a pattern of behavior. Her words left me reeling, forcing me to confront the reality that Mia's dishonesty was not a fleeting lapse in judgment, but something more deeply ingrained. As I processed this new information, I decided to ask Meg for one favor. I requested that she deliver the news to Tom herself. My reasoning was simple. I wanted Tom to hear this from someone other than me. After all, I was already painted as the villain in the family narrative, accused of being jealous and spiteful. Having Meg, a neutral party, share her firsthand account would lend more credibility to the truth. When Jake later visited Tom, it became clear that Tom was struggling to cope. Though he didn't explicitly say so, I could sense that he was grappling with his emotions, perhaps even blaming me for upending his life. His uncertainty and second-guessing were palpable, and I hoped that Meg's perspective might help him see the bigger picture. After hearing from Meg, Tom reached out to me, asking for a face-to-face meeting to discuss everything. I agreed, hoping it would provide some closure or at least an opportunity to clear the air. We met at a quiet neighborhood coffee shop, and it was evident that Tom was still in shock. The weight of all that had transpired hung heavily between us as we began to talk, both of us seeking answers in the chaos Mia had left behind. Tom listened intently as I shared Meg's revelations, and though the news hit him like another devastating wave, he seemed almost relieved to finally have the truth. During our conversation, he opened up about his breakup with Mia. As it turned out, Mia had been correct in believing Tom was preparing to propose. He had been planning to pop the question soon. But after our initial conversation, he confronted Mia about her infidelity. Faced with evidence she couldn't deny, she eventually admitted to her mistakes. Though deeply hurt, Tom thanked me for my honesty. He explained that knowing the truth now, painful as it was far better than discovering it later, perhaps after tying the knot. He admitted that for a while he had sensed something was off in their relationship, but couldn't pinpoint what it was until I called. The clarity brought by the truth was bittersweet, but it allowed him to take a step back and reassess his life. He told me he planned to focus on healing and reevaluating his priorities before moving forward. That conversation gave me a sense of closure, confirming that I had done the right thing by being truthful, even though the aftermath had been messy. However, my family's attitude remained unchanged. My parents were firmly on Mia's side, continuing to frame me as the villain in the story. They seemed more upset by the fallout of Mia's breakup than by the fact that she had cheated, and they couldn't comprehend why I had intervened. To them, Mia's feelings and reputation mattered. Their stance has been both frustrating and disheartening. It's painful to see them focus solely on Mia's pain while ignoring her actions and their consequences. Fortunately, not everyone shares their perspective. Friends and extended family members who've learned about the situation have been incredibly supportive. Many have expressed shock at my parents' behavior and have praised me for standing up for what's right, even in the face of so much backlash. Amid this storm of emotions, I'm trying to focus on the positive. The support from those who understand my side has been a source of comfort, and it's helped me stay grounded. Jake and I have decided to move forward with our wedding plans despite the challenges. We've made adjustments to our budget, and although it's frustrating to do so without my parents' promised financial assistance, we're determined to make the day special and uniquely ours. The path forward is still fraught with tension. My parents have threatened to disown me unless I make amends with Mia, but I've decided to stand firm. Their attempts to control me and dictate my choices have defined too much of my life already. It's time to prioritize my happiness and my future with Jake over appeasing people who refuse to see my worth. As each day passes, I remind myself that this isn't just about the wedding, it's about claiming my life and my identity. The drama may not be over, but I am determined to move forward with strength and integrity. My future with Jake holds promise, and I won't let the weight of family conflict overshadow the joy of building a life together. 4 days after my last update, events took an unexpected and troubling turn. Just when I thought the situation couldn't spiral any further, it did. I was at work, attempting to stay focused despite everything on my mind, when I received an urgent call from Jake. His voice carried an edge of panic as he told me to come home immediately. Alarmed, I dropped everything and rushed back, bracing myself for the worst. When I arrived, Jake looked visibly shaken. He handed me an envelope that had been slipped under our door. It was a letter from a lawyer representing my parents. I stared at it, stunned, as Jake explained how he had found it. The letter accused me of causing emotional distress and making slanderous remarks that had damaged Mia's reputation. Incredibly, my parents were threatening to sue me. The document outlined their demands: a public apology, a full retraction of my statements about Mia's infidelity, and a substantial financial payment for the harm I had supposedly caused. As I read through the letter, disbelief gave way to anger. How could my own parents stoop this low? They had pushed every boundary to make me feel isolated and guilty, and now this? It was clear they were trying to intimidate me into submission, likely knowing that Jake and I were already stretched thin with our wedding budget. As I processed this betrayal, my phone buzzed repeatedly. It was Mia. Reluctantly, I answered her call, hoping for some clarity. What I got instead was an explosive mix of desperation and rage. Mia was screaming, accusing me of ruining her life. She told me she had lost her job after Tom, in his heartbreak, had confided in mutual friends and coworkers about her infidelity. The rumors had spread quickly, and now Mia was facing a storm of judgment and criticism. She claimed her boss had labeled her problematic, which ultimately led to her termination. While I felt a twinge of pity, I couldn't ignore the irony. Mia was reaping the consequences of her own actions. Still, I tried to reason with her, explaining that she needed to take accountability for what had happened, but she refused to listen. Instead, she doubled down, accusing me of being jealous and bitter, insisting that I had always wanted to see her fail. The conversation left me emotionally drained, her words echoing long after the call ended. That evening, Jake and I sat down to discuss our options. We both knew that giving in to my parents' legal threats wasn't an option. It would only reinforce their manipulative behavior. At the same time, engaging in a legal battle would be financially and emotionally exhausting, something we couldn't afford while planning our wedding. It felt like my parents were trying to break us, knowing we were already under immense pressure. Despite the overwhelming stress, Jake's support grounded me. He reminded me that we couldn't let their actions dictate our lives or our future together. We began to strategize, considering ways to protect ourselves legally while avoiding unnecessary escalation. This ordeal had already consumed so much of our energy, but one thing was clear. No matter how difficult the path ahead, we wouldn't let them control our happiness. The following day, I contacted a lawyer for guidance. The situation left him stunned, but he reassured me that our case was strong. He advised. In the days that followed, I was overwhelmed with emotional turmoil and legal discussions. Jake and I tried to focus on our wedding preparations, but it was hard to ignore the constant tension. We both knew we had to keep moving forward, but the strain of dealing with my parents' threats and the ongoing drama took its toll. Extended family members, some supportive and others critical, began reaching out. The ones who attacked my actions only added to the stress, and though Jake didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess, I couldn't help but feel grateful for his unwavering support. Amidst all of this, Meg, the childhood friend who had first alerted me to Mia's past infidelity, sent me an unexpected message. Her words were a reminder that, even though my family had turned against me, there were still people who understood my perspective. Meg's support felt like a small lifeline in an ocean of chaos. It wasn't easy, but it gave me a little hope that I wasn't completely alone in this fight. As the days wore on, I knew that things weren't going to get any easier. But with Jake by my side and the support of a few trusted friends like Meg, I found the strength to keep going. The wedding was still on, even if it meant fighting harder than ever before. I refused to let my family or Mia's behavior define me, and I would make sure that my happiness and my future with Jake remained the priority. If my parents were serious about pursuing legal action, Meg's willingness to submit a statement about what had transpired at her party would be invaluable. With her encouragement and the evidence we had gathered, I started to feel a glimmer of hope amidst the ongoing turmoil. It was clear that this struggle was far from over, but I resolved to stay firm in doing what was right, no matter how difficult it became. In the midst of it all, I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone who had supported me during this challenging time. It hasn't been easy, but your words of encouragement and advice have provided me with direction when I felt lost. As much as I want to see this issue resolved, I appreciate having a solid support network around me. I'll be stepping away from here for a bit, but I wanted to share an update with you all before I go. The situation took another intense turn after a few more days. Mia and my dad insisted on having a face-to-face meeting to discuss everything, hoping to settle the matter. Jake and I reluctantly agreed. thinking that this meeting might finally offer some clarity or at least give us closure. We decided to host the meeting at our place to control the environment and avoid any public spectacle. When my parents and Mia arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. I could sense the expectations. They likely assumed I would be apologizing and asking for their forgiveness. But that wasn't going to happen. I knew I couldn't back down, and I wasn't about to give them I then laid out more concrete proof. I had collected text exchanges between Mia and Meg, where Mia openly admitted to her cheating and begged Meg not to tell Tom. These messages were time-stamped and irrefutable, leaving no room for doubt. I placed the printed text on the table, watching as my mother gasped in shock and my father's face flushed with anger. At this point, the tide had turned in my favor. I then turned my attention to Tom. I read aloud from a letter he had written after our conversation, describing how he approached Mia and how she finally admitted to her actions. He spoke about the emotional toll her betrayal had taken on him and how it ultimately led to his decision not to propose. The weight of his words hung heavily in the room. My parents were left speechless, their eyes glued to the evidence laid out before them. Mia remained silent, her eyes brimming with tears, fully aware of the gravity of the situation. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents had no response. They could not dispute the overwhelming proof. They were left to process the reality of what I had just revealed. I could feel a sense of relief wash over me as I realized I had finally stood up for myself and exposed the truth. For the final time, I addressed Mia directly. I told her that I had done this not out of malice or jealousy, but because it was the right thing to do. Her actions had consequences, and it was time for her to take responsibility for them. I then turned to the matter of the lawsuit. Although my parents had threatened to sue me for emotional distress and slander, the facts were crystal clear. What I had said was true. They had no legal ground to stand on. And in fact, if they pursued the case, I would have a solid counterclaim. The room was thick with tension as the reality of their position began to sink in. As I sat there, I realized that this was a pivotal moment. My parents and Mia were finally faced with the consequences of their actions. I had advocated for myself and refused to let their manipulation continue. I looked at Mia and made it clear once more the truth had come out and it was time for her to face it. As for my wedding, I made one thing absolutely clear: nothing would stop it. With or without their approval, Jake and I were moving forward, and we would not let anyone take away our happiness. Rising from the table, I signaled that the meeting was over. I hoped that this would be the turning point for all of us. With that, I felt a sense of closure and walked out of the room. Although I knew challenges still awaited me, for the first time in a long while, I felt in control of my own life. Mia and my parents could still pursue their case, but now they understood that I was ready to stand firm, and there would be no easy victory for them. The support from our friends and family has been invaluable, and it continues to give Jake and me the strength to push forward with our new life together. While the journey to healing with my sister and parents will undoubtedly be long and difficult, Jake and I are prepared to face it hand in hand. Looking back, I realized that standing up for myself and acting with integrity brought a sense of peace I had desperately needed. It was a difficult but necessary choice, and now I can take comfort knowing I did the right thing, no matter how much it cost me. As we move forward, Jake and I are stronger for having confronted these challenges head on. We've grown from this experience, and I know it's made us even more resilient. I'm incredibly grateful for the advice and encouragement I received, both from the supportive comments and the experiences shared with me. Without that, I'm not sure I would have had the strength to continue. Thank you to all of you who have followed my journey, shared your stories, and offered your kindness. It has meant more than words can express. As Jake and I move into this next chapter, we do so with a renewed sense of hope. Farewell for now, and thank you for your unwavering support. If you haven't already, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more real-life stories that continue to unfold around us.